So I work for CMEX, a global genetics company that's based out of Canada. Yes, it is one of the Americas. I like to think that we live in Canada maybe is a little different than the Southern America side of where we call United States. In all seriousness, yeah, I graduated from University of Guelph with an agricultural degree. I do live on a farm. I'm the fourth generation to farm at our current location. Just a couple examples of what our farm looks like. Very different than what you guys have here. But what is nice about my job and the opportunity that I have about traveling around the world and seeing different operations in different countries, you get to understand that the environment plays a big role in how you handle your cattle. And how you make money with your cattle. Now that being said, I want to just get a little bit of action here with everybody. Put your hands up if you get paid by the kilo. So I've never been anywhere in the world yet that we don't get paid by the kilo. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind as I talk about this here today. And I think I do have a very like-minded to all of the presentations we've had before because, as much as I say we get paid by the kilo, we do need to keep in mind our costs to get those kilos as well. Back to the introduction here. So we do a lot of AI and ET, so embryo transfer. Our program is based on producing seed stock genetics that we then sell to commercial cattlemen across North America. So I think it's really important to have an understanding of what we're trying to do with a breeding program. I think everybody probably sitting here today after our previous presentation is saying we need to go home and breed for net feed intake. Would everybody agree with that statement? I hope that's kind of what we got out of the earlier presentation. Now, I do want to say that I think that net feed intake is very important and looking at efficiency is very important, but we need to also keep in mind all of the other traits that we have. We need to make sure that we're looking at phenotype. We need to make sure that we're looking at all of the other data traits that come along with it. So we need to have a goal. We need to understand what is our goal with our breeding program. Who are we trying to sell to? How do we make money? How do we save costs? And what is the goal that we're breeding towards? And then once you understand what your goal is, you need to take an honest opinion of what your own program is. So evaluate the cow herd that you have. Understand what the limitations are. Understand what your advantages are in the market. And once you understand what's good and what's bad about your program, and you know where you're going, it's a lot easier to make selective breeding decisions, which ultimately give us genetic improvement, which lead us to where our end goal is. To me, this is a very logical approach to breeding cattle. I think we need to understand where we are at point A and where we want to get to at point B, and then make the necessary breeding decisions to get from point A to point B. So some of the tools, and I mentioned it earlier, I think really important that we look at all aspects. I was asked to come here to speak about breeding cattle and a balanced genetic approach. And I think, again, when we talk about net feed intake, we talk about growth and performance, we talk about fertility, I think those are all really key important traits. But they are all key important traits as long as we look at them in a balanced approach, and we need to look at them together. So when we look at phenotype, and I'm not going to talk too much about phenotype today, again, my good friend PJ is going to be here, and I know PJ loves talking about phenotype, so I'm going to leave the phenotype discussion up to PJ when he gets here. But, again, I think if we're only looking at genetic traits and we're not looking at phenotype, we're going to give up some sort of efficiency, whether that's in structure, whether that's in fertility in terms of how those cattle are designed. There's lots of different things that the phenotype can tell us about our cattle, and I don't want to lose sight of that. I was a cattleman first, genetics guy second, and I do think that's really important to keep in mind. We need to breed these cattle that work for the environment that we're in. So if we're breeding cattle that are structurally sound and have some longevity about them, and then we can build some performance into them at the same time while keeping that structure, I think that's really, really important. Data. I think you probably could just repeat this word 3 or 4 or 5 times across the table. A coworker of mine, he uses the saying that making breeding decisions without measuring it is like bowling in the dark. And I didn't do a whole lot of research, but is everybody familiar with bowling? Yes? Okay, so bowling, you throw the ball down the aisle and you hear some pins drop at the other side. Well, if those lights were off, how do you know where to aim the next time? And if anybody's like me at bowling, the ball would go in the gutters, so no pins would drop, so it really wouldn't matter. But I think that scenario or that quote is really true, that if we can't measure what we've got and where we want to aim for, how do we make the next breeding decision? So data, I think, is key, and I think everything that's been done on the net feed intake is really, really important, and the more data we collect on all of the traits is key to moving this program forward. And management practices. The way I produce cattle in Canada is very different than the way you guys produce cattle here, which is different than Australia, which is different than Brazil. And again, I think we need to take those management practices into consideration when we're making our genetic breeding decisions. And again, the environment. So, temperatures. Yeah, and I got a couple examples here. I don't know if this has a pointer, but at the top right-hand side, if we had embryos that were in a very tropical environment, compared to embryos that were in a very temperate environment, the cattle themselves genetically would be the same, but phenotypically they would be very different based on the environment they're in. So we need to keep that in mind when we're doing breeding genetics. I got a picture here at the bottom, which is probably more similar to the environment here, and a cow that's on a scale. Again, if we can't measure the progress that we're making, it's really hard to determine what progress it is that we've made. So I threw this up here just maybe to get some questions, and also just to show maybe a little different view, and also to show the linkage between some of the different systems. So this is an EPD chart, and EPDs is something that we use in North America predominantly. It's expected progeny difference, whereas what most people here would be used to seeing is EBVs, which is estimated breeding values. In general, they can be used very similar to come up with and make breeding decisions. It's a little bit more complicated to describe the differences, but in general, the concept is the same. And I think one of the things that's really important is we look at these two things, and this is in our system, residual average daily gain and dry matter intake. So again, very similar to the conversation we heard before, we need to look at these animals' ability to convert feed in an efficient manner without losing the performance that we've been trying to do. So net feed intake isn't a great way to be able to look at this. But at the same time, I don't want to lose the sight of the performance that we're getting out of these cattle. So in the series before, the presentation before, there was 4 quadrants. We saw a really low net feed intake with really low average daily gain. We saw a low net feed intake with better than average daily gain. And then the best quadrant was the low net feed intake with really exceptional average daily gain. The one thing I just want to make sure that we all understand is that these cattle that have a really low net feed intake and a very high average daily gain are exceptional cattle. And those cattle are cattle that are somewhat outliers, and those would be in the top 25% of the breed that can do both of those things. So if we can find those cattle, and if we can afford to pay for those cattle, those certainly are the cattle that we need to be selecting for and trying to promote and move forward. But at the same time, everybody's budget and everybody's needs are slightly different. So perhaps if a bull maybe has a higher than ideal net feed intake, but still has the performance that outweighs that net feed intake, perhaps for your program, he is something that can still work. And on top of all of this data that we've got, we do need to look at phenotype and structure and how those cattle are all going to come together in the end. So this is another thing. So we did, Matt had talked about genomics and the advantages of where EBVs are going to go and how we can use them as breeding tools. I wanted just to throw this up there, and again, this is EPD examples, but EBVs would be relatively similar in how they're used. What this is saying is with genetic DNA and genomic testing, we can increase the accuracy of each of the traits. So for example, if we're looking at calving ease, if we did a genomic test, it would be equivalent to having 26 progeny. So what does that mean? If we have a bull that's untested and you take him home and you use him in your herd, it means that by genomic testing that animal, we can end up having the accuracy of having 26 live calves on the ground and knowing what that bull is before we even put them in the pasture. So as to the point before, we need to identify these cattle at the earliest possible age. The younger we can identify these cattle, the sooner we can get them into a performance program, and the sooner we can start getting and realizing the genetic potential in each of these bulls. And all of the traits here are a little bit different. The reason that they're different is their heritability. So just keep that in mind when we do get down the road and talking more about genetics and genomics. Really what it is trying to help us identify some of the traits that can be used as a tool to make your balanced breeding decision.
For cardless transactions, in a heartbeat, it's time to discover PayPulse. With PayPulse, you can use your phone to pay anyone in Namibia for anything at any time. Send money to friends, family, whoever you like, even if they don't have the PayPulse app. Top up your prepaid airtime and load up more electricity. Want to pay your bills without leaving the couch? PayPulse has got you covered. How about depositing or withdrawing cash, paying at the shops, or settling the bill at a restaurant? Yep, with PayPulse, you can do it all. Once you have the app, you can link any card from any bank and enjoy unbeatable security through every step of registration and payment. Fast, secure, and easy to use. It's the most convenient way to pay. To get your finger on the pulse, visit paypulse.na.
This is another table that, again, Matt had already talked about, so I'm not going to spend too much time here. But what Matt had talked about was that there are some traits that are both positive and negatively linked. So as we increase our performance and our growth, we are going to also get a negative effect on birth weight. We're also going to have a similar effect on milk production. And again, some of them are positively linked and some of them are negatively linked together. So when we're talking about making a balanced breeding decision, I think we need to keep that in mind, because if we are going to increase our performance, we're going to give up some birth weight. If we're going to go out and attack the net feed intake, we are probably going to give up some performance to do that on some animals. So again, make sure that we're looking at all the traits, not just going home and selecting one individual trait that we're going to go after. So, I think depending on, again, what your management practices are and what your facilities are like, what your labor is like, what you have available to you as a producer, you need to make an educated decision on the genetics that you're going to put into your cow herd. So if you're going to be calving cows out in the middle of the field, they have to do it on their own. You need to have cattle that can be unassisted at birth, and get up and start sucking and nursing right away with no assistance. If you've got facilities that you can take on a little bit more performance and get a little bit more growth out of them, you can handle a little bit more birth weight. And again, depending on what your feed practices are, you can push that envelope in terms of performance and growth. If you want moderate cattle that again are maybe a little bit more feed efficient, but give up a little bit of that performance, we can select cattle that are going to be a little bit more moderate in stature. The opposite is true. If we want cattle that are going to go out and yield a lot of kilograms at both harvest and post-weaning, we can select cattle that are going to be a little bit larger framed. And the same on marbling. We're seeing a large shift in our consumers and what they want to eat and what they want to consume. And we can select cattle that tend to be higher yielding cattle that are less marbling, or we can select cattle that have more marbling and maybe give up a little bit of that yield to get that quality. Really what I'm trying to explain here is that every decision that we make on a breeding has an effect on another trait. So we want to make sure that we're selecting the cattle that are profitable to everybody in this room and profitable to your customers. So back to the very first slide that we had, we need to understand what we have as a breeding herd, where we want to get to with our breeding goals, and then make those selective decisions in between to get there. So I put this slide up here kind of at the end just to go over. I think it's really important to understand that we've got a bull in every breeding decision and we've got a cow in every breeding decision. And making those balanced breeding decisions, it really is a long-term decision. This isn't a one generation that you're affecting. Your decision today is going to affect your breeding decisions in 10 years from now. So if I look at this female, and I'm going to start with her, you know, I want to make sure that we're selecting cattle that phenotypically are going to be structurally sound, have a good udder, you know, good lines about them, and have that overall eye appeal that we're looking for. At the same time, we want to make sure that she's got the genetics inside of her that are going to be profitable. We want to make sure that they've got a low net feed intake. We want to make sure that she's got high performance and growth, and yet does that with a low maintenance diet. We want to make sure that we've got females that can produce calves heavy and produce good amount of milk in a very efficient way. Why I'm bringing up the cow is this cow is going to be with you in your program for 5, 10, maybe even 15 years, depending on the decisions that we make. This bull we can change every year if we need to. But this bull's genetics are going to go into the replacement females of each and every daughter that you keep. So when you're making bull buying decisions, you're not only making the bull buying decision for that particular year, you're making it for years to come. And you need to make sure that you're making that decision with a strategic approach to it. So are you buying a bull that's going to be terminal, or are you buying a bull that you're intending to keep daughters out of? And the decision either way may drastically change the traits and the phenotype that you're going to select for that breeding sire. So in summary, you know, I can't stress this very first bullet point enough. Do not single trait select. Don't go home from here today and say, hey, we need more kilograms, so we're going to select for growth and performance. Don't go home and say, hey, I want to make sure all of our calves are born unassisted and select for the lowest birth weight sires available. And again, same can be said. I really think that we can't go home and select for just net feed intake, because I think with the things that we're going to give up for some of the other traits are going to outweigh the good things we get. Not saying that any one of those traits isn't profitable to look at, and it's certainly something that we need to have as part of our breeding decision, but taking that balanced breeding approach across all of the traits, understanding which traits cost us money, which traits make us money, and how we navigate that within the environment and the environmental management practices that we have to make the most money out of the genetics that we have available. And again, I didn't talk much about phenotype, but I see PJ's here, and I know he's going to talk a lot about phenotype today, so I'll leave that up to him. But I can't stress that enough. You know, as much as we need to measure the data and make some breeding decisions with data, we can't lose sight of what these cattle need to look like and how they need to perform and the structure that comes with these cattle. The one thing that we can't do today is breed cattle from a computer and know what those cattle are going to look like in the flesh. So making sure that we've got good sound-footed cattle that have really good udder qualities, thickness throughout, and balance throughout is really key to making sure that we've got longevity in our herd.
The reward for a lifetime of dedication goes beyond money and the expectations of others. We aim to serve our community and actively participate in the development of our industry. Agra, a better life.
Understand your market. My market's different than yours, which is again different than Australia, China, Brazil. No matter where we are in the world, everybody has a slightly different market. We have different market needs, we have different market costs, and we have different profit drivers that are going to generate more income or less income for us based on how we get paid. As I mentioned before, I haven't been anywhere in the world yet that doesn't get paid by the kilo, or the pound, I guess, if you're in some different markets. But basically, the weight of the cattle that we produce is the driving factor in a lot of our breeding decisions. How we get those kilos is the really important thing. Can we get it in a more efficient way than what we are today? You know, and I think to the comment that we had before, you know, when we're comparing against chicken and pork, it's not that we are chasing chicken and pork or that we think we can get to the point of where chicken and pork are from a conversion rate. It's can we do better than what we're doing today? And the more improvement that we can put in these cattle from an efficiency standpoint, a conversion standpoint, the better set up we are for not only today's generation, but when that cow's 10 years old and still producing in our herd. Know what you have. You know, there's lots of places I go, and you know, everybody's proud. I'm proud of my cattle. Everybody in this room is proud of the cattle they have at home. But we need to take the barn blinders off sometimes and truly analyze these cattle for what they are. We need to understand what their flaws are. We need to understand what their attributes are. And then based on those attributes and those flaws, match them up with sires and groups of sires that are going to get the most out of those individual females. And know what you need to have. So again, knowing your market and understanding, you know, where we are in the market and what's going to drive your profitability. And with all those things, we can make some informed breeding decisions to get from where we are today to where we need to be in the future, both from a profitability standpoint for the farm, but also what's coming down the pipe. What are the consumers telling us we need to do a better job of in 10 years from today? So those breeding decisions that we're making today still are relative and relevant to the market in 10 years from now.